Welcome to Restorers, a Water Street Mission podcast. Over these upcoming minutes, we'll be speaking with heroes in Lancaster County and beyond who are making a positive impact on men and women experiencing homelessness and poverty. Each episode, we'll speak with an expert from the community, as well as one of our own Water Street Mission staff members, to learn more about how each of them are working to make a difference locally. Without further ado, let's dive right in.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 5 of our Restorers podcast. We're really excited that you're joining us today and are looking forward to a great conversation. Today, we're going to be looking a little bit at our residential ministries program and some of why we've created it the way that we did. And a lot of that goes to the unique circumstances that impact our guests, those who are experiencing homelessness before they get to us. Everyone's journey is unique, and so our response to that, the program that we've developed, has to account for that uniqueness, and it can't be just a one-size-fits-all program. But to begin our conversation, I'm really excited that today we have Rick Rutter, who is the pastor of Crossroads Mennonite Church, my pastor, a good friend who's also worked many, many years in the rescue mission world in a lot of different positions. And so Rick's going to join us to help us kind of get a picture of what it's like and all those unique and different ways that can lead to homelessness for individuals. So thanks for joining us today, Rick.
My pleasure, Jack. And yeah, one of the first things that I realized when I got to one of the first questions I started asking myself was there was a gentleman that came to Water Street at the same time I did, because my first experience with Water Street was as a guest here. And he had the same first name as I did. And about a year later, this gentleman was still struggling, still in and out, and I was a little bit more successful, if you want to use that term. And I looked at it and I started asking myself that question, like, why? Why am I moving in this direction and this person isn't able to? And it started opening my eyes early on that there's a lot of different factors that go into the way we make decisions, how our decisions affect us, our environment affects us, where we come from spiritually affects us. Right. It's more than just one thing that brings somebody to the doors of a rescue mission.
Right.
And so, yeah.
And so in the same way that there's innumerable ways that you can end up in that situation of being on the street, being homeless, needing help at a shelter, at a mission like ours, the pathway out can't be the same for everybody.
No, it can't be. And so I was thinking about when we started having this conversation, I started thinking about a guy that I worked with up in New Hampshire, young guy by the name of Kyle. And when Kyle came to us because he aged out of the foster care system. Didn't have a drug or alcohol problem, and didn't have any family relationships or anything like that. And so his path to success, or his path to maturity, is going to look a lot different than somebody else that's coming in with substance abuse problems. And so we walked with Kyle intentionally around, hey, what are the issues that brought you here? How can we help you be successful? How can we get you to the next step?
And even the questions you're asking in that situation are so different than somebody who's 50 years old and had medical problems and became addicted to opioids, and, you know, how even the starting place is totally different in those two scenarios.
Yeah. And so I'm grateful for like the opportunities that I've had over the years, just to be able to see how many different ways, because it journeys, like it mirrors being a pastor. Like everybody in your congregation isn't the same, right? And everybody isn't coming. No, unfortunately, Jack, not everybody's like you. That would be too easy.
That would be too hard.
But the reality is, like, even as a pastor, it's more the same. Like everybody comes from a different place, and people are wrestling with different issues, and family lives are different, and all of those things. And so for me, it's just been part of that continuing journey. God saying, "Hey, Rick, remember this, and if we're going to be honest about it, look at Jesus and how he ministered to individuals.
Right. He didn't treat everybody exactly the same.
Right.
So you've been around this world of homelessness in a lot of different capacities for a long time. We met each other 28 years ago, and yeah, that's a long time. And we're still talking to each other. That's a good sign. But so you've seen it from different angles, working in the program, working adjunct to when you were driving truck and working in other areas, running our outreach ministries, and then being a program director up in Scranton and Wilkes-Barre, and then being an executive director of a mission up in New Hampshire. So you've seen different locations, different types of programs, and many, many different people. Just for the sake of our listeners, what are some of the things, again, sometimes we get stuck in this one picture of this is what homelessness looks like. This is what leads to homelessness. It's all about addictions, or it's all about mental health issues we talked about in one of our previous episodes. Give us a sense of the variety of things that have led, people that you've worked with and seen through the years that have led to their circumstances being homeless.
Yeah, so I already mentioned one with Kyle where he just kind of maxed out of the foster care system. He's not the only one I've worked with where that's been an issue. We had a young man who was adopted, and he never knew what his real name was.
Wow.
He was 30 years old when he finally got a copy of his original birth certificate to find out where he really came from. So there's a lot of identity issues. Mm-hmm. Who am I? And whether that's our identity in Christ or our identity in the world, there's purpose issues. Why am I here? Why do I exist? There are the mental health issues. There's obviously drug and alcohol issues. There's people who become homeless because their living situation just became toxic,
right.
And so they're fleeing,
like domestic violence,
or somebody else's drug and alcohol use, or somebody else's sin that just leads this person to have to flee or wind up on the street
right.
because of no fault of their own. And so, yeah, there's, and then there's barriers that when somebody gets into that place, how do I get beyond it?
Right.
There's resources issues. I think back to Brent Myers, Walking with the Poor.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was outreach ministries director here at Water Street, that just really opened my eyes to understanding like how we see poverty it also helps us frames how we address it.
Right. How you define a problem leads to what your preferred solution will be.
Right. So if I look at it and I say, well, poverty's a lack of physical resources, then I'm going to throw money at it. Or if I see it as a lack of education, then I'm going to, try and get them into a school program or whatever. And so, it's kind of understanding that the greatest need for most of the people that we deal with is relational. Mm-hmm. Right? Because, and I think I heard you say this in another podcast where if you started struggling, you've got the relational equity to be able to survive for a period of time that a lot of people that we come across.
Right.
I'm thinking about the couple across the street from the church that we're currently trying to walk with. It's that relationship that's helping us and helping them be able to take those.
And sometimes those relationships aren't there because of our own decisions.
Oh, yeah.
We've burned a lot of bridges. Sometimes, like that young man, Kyle, you talked about, like he just never had it. He aged out of the foster care. He has no relational support. So if those first attempts to venture out into the world aren't successful, what does he have to fall back on? Who's going to help him out? And we've seen that here at Water Street. A couple of things you didn't touch on that I think you've seen. Let me know if I'm right, but just the episodic issues of a major health event, and not being able to pay it, not having the insurance to cover it, and suddenly all your other resources are drained to pay for, this health event that you've had, or the lack of affordable housing is a very real issue, and can be challenging. And if somebody's evicted because the landlord can get more money selling the building, so I'm gonna clear it out so I can sell this and make more money. People are put on the street for no fault of their own, other times because of, again, bad decisions. But the difficulty of getting into housing once you have an eviction on your record is really hard. But that goes back to defining the problem. Right. And one of the common answers, and we talked with Jen Koppel from our local coalition about this, and a lot of our government programs focused on addressing homelessness talk about housing first.
Sure.
And that goes back to what you were saying about how you define the issue.
Mm-hmm.
So if we define homelessness as a housing issue, the logical solution is provide housing. So housing first is geared all towards putting funds and energy and resources towards getting people into housing, and then making available supports to help them stay there. How does that result? And there's an important role that Housing First can play in serving our community, because, as we said, every individual who's experiencing homelessness has their own journey, and that might be the right journey out. But obviously at Water Street and at the missions that you've worked at before, there's a step beyond that we're looking at. Can you describe a little bit of what you've seen there?
So I'll just speak from my own personal place.
Okay.
When I came into Water Street in 1993, the last thing I needed was somebody to put me in an apartment. Right?
Why is that?
Because if somebody would have put me in an apartment, it just would have made it easier for me to continue making the same decisions that I was making. It would have made it easier for me to continue drinking. It would have made it easier for me to actually hide from the reasons why I was homeless in the first place. Now, are there people that you and I and others have worked with that housing is a great first step for them?
Absolutely.
As long as we bring the other resources alongside,
Yeah.
and we're intentional in helping them address some other issues that may exist.
Right.
Those issues don't exist for everybody. But I do know that you know, one of the biggest problems with Housing First that I see is the lack of an immediate solution. With Housing First, a lot of times you wind up with people on waiting lists with no place to go.
Right.
And no resources to help them in the meantime.
Yeah.
And that can be even more discouraging for someone who's just looking for, I've got to get my kid off the street today.
Right.
I've got to get myself off the street today.
Right.
I need a place to sleep tonight. And with Housing First, sometimes there's not that immediate step. And I know when Housing First started, it pulled a lot of resources away from some of those immediate reliefs. And so emergency shelters closed because there was no funding.
Yeah.
And that put more people on the street. And so now you have more people camping on the street than going into housing. And then the other thing, Jack, I would say is, like, with that Housing First, and a lot of times it's you get somebody in there and now they've lost, in some cases, what probably would have happened with me, my motivation to change, my motivation to address, because that immediate need is met. I'm comfortable. And if I get comfortable, then do I need to address this over here or not?
At least for a little while, you're comfortable.
Yeah.
But because those other dysfunctional factors in your life, if they're not addressed, they lead to discomfort in other ways. But often then the resources have already been spent on getting you into housing.
Right.
And again, this isn't to disparage Housing First as an approach.
Right.
But I think the challenge in what we've seen and experienced is that it can't be the only approach, because it's not appropriate for everyone. And it does often make it difficult to get to those deeper issues, which is what here at Water Street, and we'll be talking with Colleen later about our model in our residential track, that when people make that choice, they start in our shelter, but they have the choice. Do they want to stay in shelter and just address the housing issues? And we're going to help them as best we can. We're going to connect them with resources from the community so that they can get back into housing, get a sustainable wage job. But if they want to address those deeper issues, those root issues that led to homelessness, we invite them in. And we'll be talking to Colleen about the details on that. But how do you see some of those root issues as being, kind of the primary thing that needs to be addressed, but not always front of mind for the person experiencing homelessness?
So in 28 years, there's been a huge shift in rescue missions, and originally it was that one size fits all. It was a spiritual problem. Let's address the spiritual.
And often spiritual and addictions were maybe the two focal points.
Right. And even so, the addictions was a spiritual problem. And if you address the spiritual, you'll address the addiction.
Okay.
And so that was that was the foundation for a lot of what happened. Now, when we look at some of those root causes, now we understand that there's a wider variety of what they are. And as you're going into an emergency shelter, a lot of times what you're thinking is, okay, I came to Water Street. And when I came to Water Street, I was thinking, it's October 15th. It's getting colder. I have a T-shirt, a pair of shorts, and a pair of sneaks. And I don't want to sleep outside anymore.
Right.
So that's why I came in. And the pastor at a local church, Covenant United Methodist Church, said, you should go to Water Street. Okay. And so that's how I wound up here.
That's how you got here.
That's how I got here. Now,
in your mind, your issue was, it's going to be cold out. I need a place to sleep.
Right.
That's the issue.
That's the issue. The issue is someplace to lay my head, maybe a meal, right? And I might need to address my clothing situation.
Yes.
But I need. You remember the days
I remember
of
what
Dukes.
you were wearing. Yeah.
Okay. So you look at that and you go, okay. So for me, what I thought was the problem, or was the immediate need, was addressed. Right. However, it was in that in-between period that I said, okay, if I keep drinking, this will never change. There were substance abuse issues that needed to be addressed. There was relational issues that needed to be addressed. There were legal issues that needed to be addressed. But what really helped was understanding of the staff to say, hey, I can develop a relationship with this guy. And in developing a relationship with this guy, he can not only come to know Jesus, but he can address the other issues in his life. And so,
So it was through the meeting of the immediate needs and the relationships that were formed around that.
Correct.
That opened your eyes and your heart to maybe there's some deeper issues to deal with here.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to, again, why we've shifted our model to be broadly looking at kind of this whole person concept. There are so many different elements of a person and who they are, and there can be trauma and damage in all those different areas, and if we don't address it, we never get back to full wholeness of life. And the spiritual is a root foundation, but there's all these other factors too. It can be addictions, it can be relationships, it can be lack of life skills in certain areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so when we develop those relationships, we have those conversations. I remember one guy I was working with up in New Hampshire, and I struggled to work with him, develop a relationship with him. And then one day I invited him to go to a leadership summit with me. And when we came back from the leadership summit, now this guy's huge, and he's standing in my door, and it's the whole door. And he's got tears streaming down his face. And he said to me, thank you. It has been decades since somebody was willing to invest in me. And those are the kind of things that stick with you as you walk through ministry, and the things that God uses to help us understand that this is not a one-size-fits-all thing. Yeah. This is about an individual that God has brought across our path to say, listen, how do I love you? Right? Yeah. How do I love this neighbor that's just walked across my, or standing in my door, tears streaming down his face, and I'm going, okay, what did I do?
Well, and man, that opens up. We're probably going to have a whole nother podcast on this some other time. That statement about investing, the difference between giving somebody resources, even walking alongside of them, but in this kind of a provider-receiver relationship, as opposed to investing in somebody. I'm not giving you something, I'm investing in you, because you then have the potential to use that investment and grow it in your own life. And that's like a leadership summit. You're not giving somebody, you're investing in them. Yep. We're taking the time to help you grow. And I think that does speak to this whole person approach, the idea that it's not just what led me to homelessness, but it's what do I have in me? That's the other side of the whole person model as well. It's not just what are the deficits and how do we fill those gaps. Right. It's what are the gifts and strengths of this individual and how do we build on those for them to grow. So love that insight. Love that whoever that guest was, that really sparked something in me. And hopefully it connects with you as well. And Really appreciate, Rick, you taking the time to be here to share your story and to share some of your insights of working in this field for so long with individuals struggling with homelessness. And I hope you've learned a little bit today. We're going to come back with Colleen and dig in a little bit to how does Water Street specifically address this. So thanks once again.
Sure, my pleasure.
I want to give a profound thanks to our Season 1 podcast sponsor, Rogers & Associates, who's helping us tremendously in this first year of the Restorers podcast. They're a wealth management firm that helps clients become financially independent for retirement. You can learn more about them online at rogers-associates.com or by calling 717-560-3800. That's Rogers, RODGERS-associates.com. or by calling 717-560-3800. Thank you so much, Rogers & Associates. Welcome back to part 2 of episode 5, and today we're talking about our residential ministries here at Water Street, and really enjoyed our conversation with Rick Rudder and hearing a lot of his experiences, both his own personal experience walking this journey out of homelessness and then working in ministries all across the East Coast. A lot of great insights from Rick. And the second part of our conversation, we're really excited to have Colleen Adams, who is our Vice President of Programs here at Water Street.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you with us. We get to talk all the time, but rarely on camera.
Yeah. We'll
or on a recording. So, but we want to stick to the topic and really dig into this as we have completely recreated our residential ministries through the years. Mm-hmm. There are 2 things that come out, and I think it reflects what Rick and I were talking about, how each individual, their journey into homelessness is unique and different to that individual. And so the journey out is probably going to be different for each individual as well. Yeah. But 2 things that come up when we talk about our model is individually focused, and then this whole person concept, where it's not just about addressing one issue, but it's really looking at the whole person. Colleen, could you share a bit about what that means? What does whole person model mean?
Yeah. Well, it is interesting. So when I first came to Water Street, it was to run our health services division. And one of the things that's fascinating that we've started to realize in medical care is if you don't treat a person, body, soul, spirit, you actually will negate the healing process that, spiritually and what we believe and how we engage that. We are very integrated people. And so we moved that model. I mean, we were set up on that premise. Our board chair and founder actually had always believed in that, but I think we were able to really honor looking at the whole person. And so then when I moved over into the mission, it was we really need to understand the main levers of what drive integration from a body, soul, spirit perspective. And then we need to understand how to apply them individually. Where does a person want to go on their journey? And what are the things that would cause them to remain homeless or come back to us? And so the model started out that spirituality is the center from our perspective because it's often missed. And also we're a faith-based ministry and we believe it's really important. The other piece is we were very recovery-oriented, which I think, as we've explored homeless ministries across the country, oftentimes there is a recovery basis, specifically around drugs and alcohol, that say the drugs or alcohol are the problem.
Right.
And underbedding this whole person model is the fact that trauma plays a huge root in addictions and other things. And that trauma actually impacts body, soul, and spirit. And so for us to be understanding, we need to address the behavioral aspects, which include, addictions, but also mental health. We need to look at physical health. I mean, it's important, and so that's one of the levers of the model. I think what was fascinating to me was looking at our old programs. The number one reason people seemed to be relapsing and coming back to us is because they would do amazing work while they were with us. They would not have a community network, and they would get out into the community and they would fail. Yeah. And so saying that community network is essential, whether that's mentors or church or social organizations, was a major contributor to failure. So, which, and you bring up the Housing First model, you bring up Rick's story.
Yeah.
Interesting, he would have failed because he didn't have a community network.
Right.
I mean, first and foremost, he would have gone into isolation. That's grounds for people to stay active in addictions. And so community network was really important, which we found people couldn't engage community network because they didn't even have the life skills to engage a conversation or do those things. And so we were like, wow, we need to add a lever, which is life skills.
Right.
Of course, one of the pieces is housing because we have to look at housing, but there's...
So let me take a step back.
Go ahead.
You're referencing different levers and
Yep.
pieces of the model.
Yeah.
When we think of that whole person model and all the different elements as we're looking at an individual as a whole person, how have we defined that? What are the things that we've identified? These are the levers or the pieces of who an individual is that we're going to try to walk with them in addressing where there are deficits, where they have strengths, and we want to build upon those. But what are those elements of the whole person model?
Yeah, the whole person would be community network. It would be life skills. It would be housing. It would be career or service because, we have guests that are on a disability. And so, work is a very important part of who we are. And so that can
may
be
not be a
paid
wage-earning
employee.
job. It
may be volunteerism so that you're part of a community. And so we define that to look at that. And we actually have mixed a lot of our financial pieces into career and services, kind of how that plays out. And so we're looking at what that development looks like. One thing that we actually missed when we first defined the model was family engagement, meaning I'm a dad without my children with me, and how do we expect that person to leave us without some kind of re-engagement and teaching him how to be dad, or a new mom here who has children? How do we need to work on family engagement, parenting, just what does life look like?
Right.
I remember it was interesting in terms of stories. When I first came, my mindset was very much of a white middle class mindset where I remember somebody saying, these kids are going to, or this family's going to go and the kids are going to play, in the streets, and we yell at them here for doing that. And I'm going, well, why would they not have a yard and a swing set to play in, which was me bringing my mind to what their life should look like. Right. And I think we tend to do that versus looking at what are the strengths you bring to a family in terms of teaching them how to be a family, and it looks different culturally. And so I would say the family engagement piece is not putting our views on, but saying this is what brings health, and just teaching people, because, I had women who didn't know, they never owned a toothbrush at the age of 20, and their kids had never owned a toothbrush. And I was like, everybody owns a toothbrush because you brush your teeth twice a day. And, and so very different in how we teach people things they've never learned. And we make a lot of judgments that people are supposed to know, but that's not necessarily true. Yeah. And so I think I've hit, the other two big components would be physical health, and then behavioral health we define as mental health and addiction. So that's all.
Yeah, and you touched on kind of, I don't know if it was clear in how you explained it, there's kind of two separate social aspects. There's community engagement and connections and family engagement. Those are really two separate things. We have to look at those through different lenses.
Absolutely.
Because of the context that individuals are coming to us from.
Correct.
And some of those family engagements, it may be completely non-existent in some of our guests' lives.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Absolutely.
Great. So that's kind of that construct of the whole person model. And I know that as people come in and take that step from shelter into residential, we begin assessments along the lines of all those areas as well, to help us understand how do we come alongside someone on their journey. Can you explain a little bit of that process and how that plays into the creation of an individualized action plan, where kind of, again, going back to our conversation with Rick, that response to the journey into homelessness is going to be unique to each individual. So what we're going to discover during that assessment phase and then how we walk with them is going to be unique. So how do we do that? How do we do those assessments and really get to know what aspects of the whole person do we need to lean into first?
Yep. So in our model, we actually start giving a guest a copy of all those various pieces of the pie, if you will. We have some information from intake of where they might be struggling.
Right at the beginning.
But we really want it to be self-directed from the guests where they want to start. And sometimes they start at a place that's not going to be helpful, but we still let them direct where they're going to go, understanding that we're going to have time to keep modifying. And so people will make definitions as they say, here's my problem. Usually the problem is I just need a house and everything will be fine. The other thing we hear is I just need a job and everything will be fine. And so we allow people to say, okay, what does it look like? But we also do an exploration of, so you have this, how is that going to help you rise out of poverty or rise out of homelessness long term? And usually through that dialogue with the case manager and the life coach and the guest, they start to realize that what they've been driven to may not be the thing that's going to help them long term. And so we do navigate an action plan where we set specific goals based on, what a guest says is important. We certainly allow people to fail in that, which helps us to come back and say, okay, well, you believed it was being on the job, but now we're understanding every time you get on a job, you're drinking or you have explosive anger. So maybe we need to work on some different things. And so that's kind of how we navigate that as we walk with people.
And I love that approach. And it touches on something we talked about in a previous episode. That undergirds some of what we do is this motivational interviewing concept. Not actually the formal process of motivational interviewing, but understanding that somebody is going to be more motivated to take steps towards something they care about.
Absolutely.
And so if we're doing an assessment and saying, oh, you have a big deficit in this area of your life and in this area of your life, let us help you with that. And they're like, no, man, I need a job. I don't need to work on these, the trauma I experienced in my family growing up. I don't need to deal with my addictions. I got that. I just need a job.
Right.
Honoring the person, helping them accomplish the goals that they feel are most important, opens the door, builds trust, so that when they're ready to go deeper, when maybe they don't experience the level of success they would anticipate, now we can come alongside and address some of those other areas in the whole person.
Correct.
And help them with that. So thinking about how our guests engage around all these different elements, again, many of them wouldn't be conscious of that right away. They're thinking of what's the presenting issue. I'm homeless, or I'm dealing I can't find a job, or they may be able to identify one aspect of a struggle behind things that have led to this. But do you have any examples of somebody who kind of came in with those presenting issues and it took a while, even for our staff, to understand how do we address maybe one of these deeper issues that's just, it's the block to making progress for that person?
Yeah. Probably it was interesting kind of teaching the staff in the very beginning. And we had one gentleman who came to us and we were still in the mindset of, people are going to have to do all these things and move forward, even if it's their direction. We're going to
set goals right from the beginning, and you got to
get
through.
Moving, or you don't belong here. You're not working hard enough. And so we had a gentleman, and he was the typical, I just need better skills to get a better job because, I keep having these periods of homelessness. And what was fascinating was he was so severely depressed, he could barely get out of bed every day.
Wow.
And so I remember just stopping everything and saying, have we talked to him about what it looks like to deal with his depression and get that stabilized before we move on to some of these other things? And even just give him permission. Like, you don't have to work. You're not paying to be here. But we're just going to love you through that. And I remember, our word ooch was, he just has to ooch forward and explaining what an ooch was. And so we defined an ooch. And still to this day, people are like, we learned so much. Because for the first month, we gave him a goal of getting out of bed once a day and getting to the dining hall. That's all he had to do.
Wow.
While we were working simultaneously on treatment and medications and that kind of thing. And then the next month, we were like, we need you out of bed 2 days a week. Or two
times
meals a day. Yeah. And it was interesting because some days he couldn't make the 2 times a day, but he always made the 1 time a day. And then I remember, after months, people are like, what's he doing here? He's only doing this little bit. And all of a sudden, the depression was at a manageable place, and he was actually able to engage the next thing, which was really the career services.
But if we had held him to a standardized program and formula of everybody needs to do this, it probably would have completely derailed him.
He would,
he would have flamed out.
Yeah.
But that's so cool that we can adapt, understand all those aspects that how can he accomplish all of these tasks and goals with this overwhelming depression.
Yeah.
But if we can just meet him there, walk with him slowly and patiently, I think it's a beautiful story of how this really works.
To a community network that he could not engage in his depression. What's beautiful about him, he's never been back in 8 years. He was 2 years with us, working, homed, a contributing member of society, and it was really just the timeout that he needed to deal with that.
That is fantastic.
Yeah. A good example for me would be, my first husband was dying. I really wanted to lose weight for some medical concerns, but I didn't have time to go to the grocery store and get the food and do what I needed to do. So I was from a stages of change. I was ready to go, but actually by other life events, importance in my life was not at a place where I could make a change. Right. And so we have often seen people who kind of are ready to make the change, but other life circumstances are so out of whack that they just can't make it. And so some of the things, I would say, a guest that we've been working with for like 8 years and then finally turned the corner and got it, fought with us that their mental health was not a reason that they couldn't stay employed. If they just had a job, they could have a house. And we would say there's a lot of things, where you last about a month on a job, and then some of these things that are past traumas really seem to be impacting you. When are you ready to deal with that? And are you ready to deal with that? I don't need to deal with that. I just need the job in the house. And this has gone on. Yeah.
So they haven't been with us for 8 years, but they'll come back because everything falls apart. Yeah. They insist it's this issue. Yep. We walk with them through it. They're out for a while. Yep. It falls apart. They come back. Yep. And in this individual's case, they finally have said, I'm ready to.
Several years ago when this person came back, they were like, okay, like I can't do this on my own. And there's probably some truth. I trust you guys now because I've known you for a while and I'm going to listen. I need to get some mental health treatment. Yeah. And it was interesting for the person to be able to find some stability. And actually from that point forward, we were able to work with some other services like vocational rehab to actually get that person retooled to be in a good position for them. And once they were able to demonstrate that they could work while they were with us in residential, they saved up money and actually have been able to be out on their own. But it wasn't a simple journey because the ability for somebody to say, I'm ready to go and do this, it can take a long time for somebody to really
and I think that
be ready.
That's eye-opening, I'm sure, to a number of our listeners to think that we would be engaged with somebody over that long haul. And again, it's not that they're living with us for 8 years, although we do have some who stay for 2 or 3 as they're working through a lot of different issues. But that cycle, when you've got the depth of trauma and issues that have kind of built up over time, it's not a quick fix. There is no quick fix. Right. And so, that really weighs on me as I think about our staff, that journey, the patience that takes, just the compassion to stick with it. See somebody who you see them making a little bit of progress, but they haven't addressed the big issues. But I'm grateful, Colleen, for you and your team in developing this approach that allows us to look at the whole person, to look at all these different elements of what makes them whole, and be able to walk with them on that journey patiently to get them to the place they need to be, where they can even receive the help that they really need. Sure. So thank you for that. Thank you to you and your team. And thanks for giving some more insights to us today to help us just understand it a little bit better. And
absolutely.
I hope it was helpful for you, our listeners and viewers out there. There's so much more. And we'll come back and revisit elements of our residential program over some of our future podcasts, I'm sure. Because there's so much going on in different areas. Our next one will be talking about physical health and how health services being right on campus is so important. So,
it's amazing. Yeah, absolutely.
So thanks again, Colleen, and thank you to our listeners and viewers for joining us today. I hope it was a fruitful time for you.